and welcome to the Caffeinated Bible. Today we're launching our study in the parables, which will take us through till the end of August. And hopefully I've got a video today that'll help put that in perspective and get you motivated for it. And also, I think it'll be kind of fun. So before we drop into the video, make sure you got plenty of coffee and we're ready to go. Now, for those of you who might be new to this channel, my name is David Paris, and I've been teaching with various seminaries around the world for the past 30 or so years. And what I'd like to do with this channel is open that material up to a much wider audience. So if it's beneficial and you enjoy it, please let others know about it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you turn on notifications, then when I post new material, you'll get notified about it. The focus of this channel during the summer is going to be on the parables of Jesus. You know, what do they mean? How do we study them? How do we interpret them? How do they challenge and provoke us even down to this day? Now, immediately after I announced that a few weeks ago on the channel, I thought, what am I doing? I mean, do I have enough material to last for all summer? Do I have enough material to keep my students active and engaged all summer? What am I, just panic set in about all these things. So I had to sit down and think, why am I doing this? Why am I teaching the parables? And is it worth spending the next 10 weeks looking at the parables of Jesus? And so to answer that question, and hopefully convince you, as I've convinced myself, I've come up with Dave's top 10 reasons why we need to study the parables. Coming in at number 10, the parables are simple skeletal stories taken from everyday life. There's stories about shepherds and people cooking, workers in the vineyard, and the characters in them are very simple. We meet a shepherd. We don't know anything about his motivation or background story or anything like that. We just know it's a shepherd or a woman or a person cooking or people working in the field. They're very, very basic stories. But within that basic skeletal story, they really convey a lot of meaning. So number 10, parables are simple stories. Now, coming in at number 9, while the parables may be simple stories, their meaning is not simple. Or they don't convey one simple basic moral teaching, but they're very complex and they require a lot of thought. If they were simple little stories with one moral principle or idea, then they would become trite. They wouldn't have been studied for 2,000 years and we would have lost interest in them a long time ago. Even the shortest parable in Luke 4:23, when Jesus says, "Surely you will quote to me the parable, 'Physician, heal thyself,' that has an incredibly complex backstory to it that you need to understand to grab what's taking place there. Those 3 words provide a little narrative world for us to think through what Jesus is arguing. So number 9, even though the stories are simple stories, their meaning is not simple. Coming in at number 8, even the most skeptical historians agree that Jesus taught in parables. You can take the greatest skeptic out there and they will still say that Jesus was a teacher who used parables. Now there's kind of 3 things that even the most skeptical historians will agree about the study of Jesus. Number 1, he was crucified. Number 2, he was known as a healer. And number 3, he taught in parables. This should give us a great reason to study the parables because the impact that they even have down to this day as to how they are understood and that Jesus taught in parables. Number 7. The parables have inspired the church over the past 2,000 years. All that you have to do is look at the artworks that have focused upon the parables. Stories or literature, sermons or preaching, even carvings within cathedrals that all focus upon the nature of the parables. The parables have been a rich source of inspiration for the church to mine over the past 2,000 years. And not only have they impacted and influenced the church, but the parables have exercised an incredible influence upon the wider society and culture as a whole. For example, I would argue that the movie Crash, which was filmed, like 20 some years ago, has at least 2 good instances within it of the parable of the Good Samaritan. But we're going to have to wait for that. So coming at number 7, the parables have served as a rich inspiration of theology, thought, reflection, art, literature for the church, and secondarily for the wider culture as well. Kind of looking at the reflection in the camera there, I'm realizing that my COVID haircut here is probably going to need a little bit of therapy. It's getting a little wild and long. But I digress. That brings us back number 6 here. Because the parables are simple stories that were taken from everyday life in the first century Galilean countryside, what it means is that we get a lot of insight into everyday life during that time from the parables. We learn about families, relationship between the rich and the poor, farming, shepherding. All these little stories contain little nuggets or facets of insight into life during that period. Now, the parables weren't spoken to convey historical or cultural information about that period. This is very much a secondary side benefit. So, number 6, they contain little nuggets of information or insight into life in the Galilean countryside during the first century. Number 5. The church interpreted the parables for the first 1900 years as allegories. Then starting in 1900, there was a major shift in how we read and interpret the parables. No longer are they seen as allegories, but now they're seen as narratives with metaphors and metaphorical blending taking place within them. This has led to a lot of productive thought and research on the parables over the past 100 years. It is not a done and dusted field of study, but it is very rich. Trust me, I chair the Cognitive Linguistics section of the Society of Biblical Literature, and every year we get a lot of papers proposed along the lines of research into the parables. It's an exciting and developing field of research theologically. Number 4. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. The parables address fundamental questions about human life. Loss, finding, estrangement, forgiveness, separation. These are all questions that every human being that's lived on the face of the earth has been faced with and challenged with. And the parables hit these issues straight on in their message. This means that there is a timeless nature to them. The parables, when they were spoken in Jesus' day, speak as provocatively to us today as they did back then. And they are also transcultural to a large extent. They allow these parables to be used in just about every culture around the world. All right, let's see what number 3 gives us here. The parables operate as metaphors and narratives. This means in order to understand the parables, we have to understand how metaphors and narratives work. The side benefit to studying the parables then is that we learn about narratives and metaphors, not only how to understand them and interpret them, but also how to use them in teaching and preaching in other situations in daily life. So number 3, the parables are metaphors and narratives, and to interpret the parables, we need to understand how they operate. Oh, that was so close. Number 2, we're getting good here. The parables are subversive and provocative and revolutionary. John Dominic Crossan writes, "Myth establishes a world, satire attacks a world, parables subvert a world." So for example, in the parables, we meet a wayward son who gets a party and reward when he comes home, but yet the older son feels he's a slave. You have people that work under the hot Middle Eastern sun for 1 hour and they get paid the same as those who worked all day long. Parables subvert our notions of what's right and wrong, forgiveness, who's inside and who's outside of our group. parables subvert and provoke our theological thought. And finally, the number one reason why we should study the parables is that the parables are very diverse in their teaching and nature. As a result, they remind us of a fundamental theological truth, and that is no one story, teaching, or concept can convey everything there is about God and salvation. If that were the case, then we as human beings would quickly fall into idolatry. Rather, we are finite trying to understand the infinite. We're temporal trying to grab hold of the eternal. Each parable gives us small glimpses and insights into the nature of this incomprehensible God and the salvation he offers us. So the diversity and the nature of the parables remind us that no one single view or summary of who God is will ever be sufficient. We always need multiple views to understand who God is. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote, "Pictures hold us captive. And in order to understand something, what we need are more pictures." And he was talking about philosophy. If we have a picture here, a philosophical system just looks within that picture frame. But you're never going to understand all of reality, nature, ethics, or various things like that from one picture. What we need are multiple pictures to be able to understand who God is, the nature of reality, salvation, the Christian life. And the parables are like this art gallery with all these little pictures arranged for us to know these things and to understand these things. So, top reason for understanding the parables is they remind us that we need multiple images to understand who God is. Well, that brings me to the end of Dave's top 10 reasons of why to study the parables. Now I'm a little scared because I'm thinking, can I really deliver on all those promises? I sure hope so, but it's going to be one wild ride as we study these parables for this summer. Once again, if you find this material useful, subscribe. If you really like it, let other people know. That lets other people find it on YouTube, and the channel gets out to a much wider audience. Until next week, may the peace of the Lord be with you.